Week 1 against Miami is going to be the most important game of the year for the Florida Gators. We'll talk about that here on Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Friday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Giants Country and NFL 33. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers join today. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And like I said, we're talking about the most important games for the Florida Gators this year, which is why I will tell you right now, Georgia ain't on this list. And it's not that that game's not important, but I do think that, at least from my perspective and how I look at importance, I'm kind of looking at this as Florida's probably going to be 18 to 22.5 point underdogs in that game against Georgia. I think it's silly to look at that game and go, oh, the game where Florida's probably going to be 3 touchdown underdogs. That's one of the most important. It's one of the biggest games. Don't get me it's a massive rivalry game. It means a ton. I just don't think that this year in particular, it's one of the top 3 most important games. It's still a massive game, no doubt about it. It's just, for me, this year, I don't think it is. But Miami, on the other hand, look, I don't care how down in the dumps you are about the Florida Gators right now, or how down in the dumps you might be about the Florida Gators right now. I don't care if you're one of the people who every single day go in the comments and just start talking about how horrible the team is, how horrible the program is, and say you're a Gator fan and you're just like bashing it constantly. I get it. You're frustrated. You're mad. But we all know that the first week of August rolls around, every Florida Gators fan, except for the very select few, every Florida Gators fan is going to be chomping at the bit for this game. I can tell you now, I'm going to be there for this game. I'm not missing this game, baby. I'm going to be Miami at Florida. Yeah, I'll be there for sure week 1. And I do think that it's a big, I guess, gauge for where this team has been and where they're going to be. For both schools, really. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important. When you look at Miami and Florida this year, in 2023, both of them were incredibly young in terms of true freshmen playing snaps, playing significant playing time, and being big parts of the team. Like for Florida, you had Jordan Castell played your most snaps on defense. For Miami, Francis Maligoa was one of your most, he had one of your highest snap counts on offense. So, and of course, you had Ruben Bain for Miami, and for Florida, you had Kelby Collins and TJ Searcy and Eugene Wilson III. And so each team had pretty damn good freshmen last season, and each team had bad years last year, underwhelming years, disappointing seasons. Both teams had that. Both fan bases got through that by going, well, we're just really young right now, and next year we're going to be a lot better. That's fair. That's a good point. This game, though, week 1, is where both teams who underwhelmed in 2023, both teams who were really young in 2023 and inconsistent in 2023, both of those teams go head to head in week 1. That's going to be your first impression of this team this season, is what you see against another young team that's expected to take big strides. Again, both sides. If you're from Miami, then yeah, you're looking at this Florida game like, all right, we're a young team going up against another young team that's supposed to take strides. How do we compare? And if you're Florida, you do the same thing. We're Florida. We're going up against a young Miami team that they're expected to take big strides. They've got their veteran upperclassman quarterback. How do we look? So I think for both teams, this is just a general gauge for success and a gauge for where you are and what your coaching staff is doing to turn your program around, since they're kind of both going through it right now. But I also think for Florida, your defense, this is going to be a big test. I know that there's a lot of people who are wishy-washy on Cameron Ward, formerly of Washington State, by way of Incarnate Word. Which, like, there's a fun little tie-in to all this with Cam Ward for me specifically, at least 3 years ago, if not, 3 years ago, going on 4 years now. I had an agent message me, and he said, "Hey, do you want to interview this college quarterback that I represent? Watch his film. Let me know what you think, and if you want to do the interview, we'll set up an interview." I watched the film. True freshman at Incarnate Word. Bazooka for an arm, working in a very air raidy offense. Bazooka for an arm, was throwing dots, was moving around, and I was like, okay, kid looks pretty damn good. Did the interview. Kid was incredibly nice, incredibly kind. He wasn't super talkative, but he was incredibly nice and kind. And that kid, Cam Ward. So just a few years later, when I interviewed a kid at Incarnate Word, he ended up becoming the likely starting quarterback for the Miami Hurricanes, who play my Florida Gators in week 1. So that's a fun little tie-in for Cam. I did text him when he went to Miami, and I was like, all right, dude, see you then, because that's going to be a big one. But it's also, so for your defense, you're going up against I think he's a damn good quarterback, damn good college quarterback with NFL prospects, damn good college quarterback. They've done a good job recruiting the offensive line, and you can anticipate that they're going to have a pretty good offensive line. Now you're looking at a Florida Gators defense that got torched consistently last year. Couldn't generate a pass rush consistency last year. Cam Ward's going to be a big test. So for week 1, I think it's not just where are we as a program as far as our young guys developing, but where are we as a program as far as our young defensive coordinator hopefully figuring it out in the SEC this year. There's just this defense actually taking strides and developing. And the evaluation is going to be huge for Billy Napier and this coaching staff of looking at, did we get the nail? Did we hit the nail on the head with Joey Slackman going from the Ivy League to the SEC? Pop Howard coming over and playing a significantly bigger role. Trickways Bridges. Everybody that you brought in, DJ Douglas, Asa Turner, everybody. This is where you get to find out kind of, were we right or were we wrong? And also, you got 7 games in the swamp this year. This is your first one. Set the tone in the swamp that, hey, we're still the Florida Gators. Like, yeah, we've been down. We're working around things, but we're still very much the Florida Gators. Don't play with us. Like, don't come into the swamp where only Gators get out alive. All right. We're about to talk about the next biggest game for the Florida Gators. It is actually the only SEC game on this list. I'm just realizing now. But first, a quick word from Ibata. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Ibata. Grocery bills are so damn expensive these days. I don't know how many of you do the grocery shopping, but like we split it here, and oh my goodness, it is ridiculous. But now I don't have to be as egregious. You can start getting cash back on your grocery shopping with the free Ibata app and get cash back every time you shop. Okay? And it's not just groceries. Like, if you want to make money while you're spending money, you could do that every time you shop with Ibata. Ibata is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies to toys if you got kids. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibata user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. 2, honestly, for my household, 3. Yeah, go ahead. Vacation, anyone? Tickets to the game, anyone? Right now, Ibata is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibata using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store, whatever you use, download the free Ibata app and start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCollege. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day, we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Going to the next game, it's Kentucky for me. Just genuinely, this is one of those games it is embarrassing where we are right now as a program that Kentucky is a game that I'm looking at and saying, this is one of the most important games on the schedule. That's embarrassing. Okay. I just want to point that out. Like, I know a lot of us, myself included, like, we look at Florida and we go, okay, you should be great every year. You should be. But realistically, where we're at now, I'm talking about freaking Kentucky, and I'm going, oh, yeah, this is one of the most important games of the season. I feel like a jackass. I'm just going to be honest. Like, I do. But for me, Kentucky, for Florida kicking the crap out of them for as consistently as they have over the past few decades, really, the past 6 seasons, well, I'll say even just the past 4, because the past 4 have been where they've been awful losses. They've been embarrassing, okay? It's been the Kentucky game has been a massive alarm sounder in each of the past 2 seasons. You go back to Billy Napier's first season, and I the year before that as well, and the year before that as well, but I'm talking about for Billy Napier's tenure. The first season, it was you had the fantastic Utah game. You crapped the bed against South Florida. You had the bad game against Kentucky. Like, it was Utah, and then there was like question marks behind it. And that was incredibly frustrating. And the Kentucky game, I do believe, was Anthony Richardson's worst game in 2022. And then the 2023 game came around, and we were like, all right, we lost that game partially because of how volatile of a player Anthony Richardson is. Then 2023 came around, and we were like, all right, we got it. And Kentucky just punched you in the freaking face every single play. That's all all Kentucky did was go, hey, what if we just beat the crap out of them? Like, what if we just did that? And then they came in and they did that. Okay. You lost against Kentucky last time in the Swamp. That was the game where Will Levis played horrible. Anthony Richardson played worse. You can't lose to Kentucky in the Swamp again. Okay. You lost to Kentucky last year because they out-physicaled you in every sense of the word. You can't let that happen to you again. This is one of those games where you go into a Kentucky game and you know they're going to be physical as all hell. It's like when you play the Ravens or the Steelers in the NFL. You play one of the AFC North teams. It's like when you play the Titans with Derrick Henry. It's like when you play Kentucky. It's like when you play 2011 Alabama. Like, you're just playing a team that, whether or not they're better than you, they're going to try their best to out-physical you. And Florida, the past few years, has just rolled over and died when they face that mentality. You cannot let Kentucky out-physical you again. Especially if you're Billy Napier, you cannot let Kentucky out-physical your team every single year that you've been in charge of the program. Things started going downhill with Dan Mullen there. Yep. But now you've been here for 2 full seasons. You're going on your 3rd one. I don't even care. Like if people want to bring up wins, losses, and like, none of that even matters. Obviously it does, but in this vacuum, it doesn't matter, because what I'm talking about is not whether you win or lose the game. What I'm talking about is not whether it's an entertaining or boring game. What I'm talking about is that now 2 times against Kentucky specifically, your team has come out flat. When you go against teams that are just uber physical, your team folds. And I hate saying that. Obviously, as a Florida Gators fan, I'm not like, oh, yeah, that's what I want. I want to be Texas Tech in 2012, whatever. No. But the fact of the matter is, the reality of the situation is that every time that Florida's gone against a team that's just incredibly physical under Billy Napier, they've folded. And we've talked about the strength and conditioning being a part of that. But also, at a certain point, you just got to, like, straight up, you just got to be a man. You just got to be an adult. And you just got to go, yeah, I shouldn't let them push me all over the yard with ease. If they're stronger than you, sure. But you can't roll over and die every time a team wants to get physical with you. And again, it's not just a Napier thing. It's just that it's happened every year under Napier now. Like it happened under Mullen too. You look at the LSU game where they just ran counter trap the whole time and just beat the crap out of you. Can't happen again. Also, for Florida, you have the Kentucky game and then you have a bye week. And then you go Georgia, at Texas, host LSU, host Ole Miss, at Florida State to end the season. Okay? Those are your 5 games to end the season. Kentucky game, your record at the end of the Kentucky game is probably going to be a pretty good indicator for where the team is at from that point for the rest of the year too. Because I mentioned this the other day. If you go into that bye week with a 4-3 record, I'm going to assume you're losing out the rest of those games. Like that I'll tell you now, if you go into that bye week after Kentucky with a 4-3 record, I'm assuming Florida's losing the rest of the games. I'm assuming you're going 4-8. Because if you can't win 5 or 6 games in that first 2/3, those first 2 legs, because don't forget now it's 4 games by, 3 games by, 5 games to wrap up. So if you can't win 5 or 6 games in those first 2 legs, I have no confidence in you winning any games to end the year in that last stretch. All right. To talk about the last game we're about to, before we do that though, we're going to get a quick word from FanDuel. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And ladies and gents, the NBA back. The NBA is back. I love it. I love it. I'm very excited for March Madness as well. Like I'm going to get to bet on Florida in the tournament, more likely than not. Almost, I feel pretty confident in that. I'm going to get to bet on Florida in the tournament. I've never been able to do that because by the time I started betting till now, they haven't made the tournament. So I get to do that on FanDuel, and I'm very happy for it. Get bucks with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. I've been having a lot of fun betting on Trey Mann. Dude just stuffs his stat sheet at this point. I don't care whether or not you think he's good or not. He gets stats. Okay? I'm cool with it. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. Remember that FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. To wrap up today's show, we're talking about the last game on the schedule that I think is the most important game. And it's also the last game on the schedule, period. I mean, if you make a bowl game, then sure. But on the actual schedule, this is the last game. Florida State. I will start by saying this. I don't think it's I don't think it's a hot take to say that Florida State's going to be worse in 2024 than they were in 2023. They were a very good team in 2023, and I've said before, I kind of wish they got into the college football playoff. They probably would have got smoked, right? And don't bring up the Georgia game to me where they had a bunch of starters. Both teams had a bunch of players out, but Florida State had way more starters out. But I kind of wanted them to make the playoff because I was pretty confident they lose that game handedly. And I kind of wanted to kill the noise, kill the, we should have been in the playoff now. Like I wanted to destroy that. And I kind of wish they did because again, they would have gotten smoked. Just saying. But I think that it's a pretty general consensus idea that they're going to be worse this year than they were last year. They've got a ton of roster turnover, starting QB, starting running back, 2 starting receivers, your starting tight end, I believe a starting offensive lineman. You've got 2 of your top defensive linemen are in the NFL draft. 1 hit the transfer portal. You didn't have great linebackers, and I wasn't really sold on many of the DBs. But your best players are gone if you're Florida State. So it's very interesting to see what that roster turnover is going to be like, especially because this is something where I've talked about it a lot in terms of the Florida Gators, where we've had the roster turnover and we go, we're expecting the young guys to step up and do better. When you talk about just that sheer volume of roster turnover, and you're talking about, well, we're projecting this guy to get better and this guy to get better and this guy to get better. History just tells you that not all of those guys are going to get better. Not all of those guys are going to reach your expectations. So for Florida State, you might be on the downswing this year. I would love that. I would very much love that. But regardless, for Florida, like, you've got to swing momentum back your way. 2 pretty close losses for against Florida State the past 2 years for Billy Napier. That first game against that first Florida versus Florida State game for Billy Napier's career in Tallahassee, you were a Hail Mary, legitimately 1 touchdown away for the team that you were, I think, 2 touchdown underdogs in that one. Because I remember Florida State like storming the field and thinking you didn't even, like, you were supposed to win this game by considerably more. So I do think it's huge. But also, just looking at this, I think Florida, I do think Florida wins that game week 1 against Miami. I would say, I don't know if I said that before. I do think Florida wins that game against Miami. Okay? Mainly because you're at the Swamp. Cam Ward has played in some decent environments. He's never played in the Swamp. Okay? It's going to be his first game leading the offense in the Swamp. It's probably going to be really tough for them, right? You have to figure, like, logically, I think that makes sense. So I think you beat Miami. I still think you're a better team than Central Florida. I don't care how good Central Florida feels. I like Gus Malzahn as a coach. Schematically, he's really fun. He's really good. I think Florida's a better football team than UCF. That means that if you've beaten Miami and UCF, you go into the Florida State game where even if you've got 2 or 3 wins, won't happen, but even if you got 2 or 3 wins and you go into the Florida State game, you've got a chance where if you beat Florida State, you can crown yourselves the undisputed kings of the state. Okay? Like that's something that every year the Big 3 and little step cousin UCF try to have the conversation of, like, who's the best program in the state of Florida? Which team's the best in the state of Florida? And, like, Florida State, Miami play frequently. Florida State and Florida play frequently. UCF doesn't, because they don't play anybody really. That's been a big thing of theirs where they're like, we're undefeated because we're playing St. Mary's School for the Blind. Like, whatever. But this is a very rare time where you have that Florida solstice, I guess we'll call it, where Florida gets to play Miami, Central Florida, and Florida State. And if you beat all 3 of those, crown yourselves the undisputed kings of the state, and that will be huge for recruiting. That'll be huge for changing the narrative in the state. That'll be huge for Billy Napier's potential future, or whoever the hell it is. That'll be huge for the University of Florida to go out there and beat Miami, Central Florida, and Florida State. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free reviews in the podcast. We'll be back tomorrow. Actually, no, we won't. We'll be back Monday to talk more Florida Gators football. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Giants Country and NFL 33, and I'll see you all next time.